Who says the summer's boring in hockey land? The Canadiens just signed Joe Veleno, and people are wondering why. The schedule gets released, and people are losing their minds over the back-to-backs the Canadiens have to play. And there's all kinds of rumors still going on, as well as some news out of the CBA that benefits younger players with a special status that's available next year in the American Hockey League. And we'll talk about that and a little bit more right here on the July 16th edition of Montreal Hockey Talk. Hey everybody, Kosta here, and I don't normally do this, but take a look below. If you like the video, thumbs up, subscribe, hit the notification bell when the next one comes up, because we like to keep our family engaged, and engaged is certainly one of the things we want to do. Now, if we take a look at today's discussion points, we're going to start off with one of the ones that people are really griping about, and that's the fact that the Canadiens' schedule was released, and the Canadiens have a bunch of back-to-backs. Now, you can't really see it on this graphic, right? But the Canadiens only have 4 games in February. Why is that? Well, we all know that the Canadiens are going to Italy for the Olympics this year. Or the Canadiens. The NHL is going to Italy for the Olympics this year. And you know what? The players wanted it. So great. Why is everybody bitching? That is what I want to understand. Yes, there's 17 back-to-back games. Ooh, that's news. No, it's not. Last year, the Canadiens played 15. And why? Because there was the Four Nations face-off. Now, granted, there are a lot of teams in the National Hockey League, many of them out on the West Coast, that don't play as many back-to-backs. Why? Because of travel. What ends up happening is they end up staying put, and Eastern teams come out and will play back-to-backs, let's say in Anaheim and LA, or, they'll play back-to-backs in Vancouver and Seattle, that type of thing, because of travel restrictions. And Western Conference teams, they don't play as many back-to-backs because they don't travel as often. It's an advantage they have, sure, and a West Coast bias, if you were. But at the end of the day, it's been like that for decades. So why is everybody complaining about 17 back-to-back games? Well, if you take a look at it, it's 34 games out of the season where the Canadiens are going to be playing on back-to-back nights. It's, an opportunity for a young Jakub Dobeš to get a chance to be between the pipes. And you know that he's going to get more time between the pipes than he did last year because of the simple fact that Sam Montembeault was burnt out by the time the playoffs rolled around. He had played over 65 games if you include the playoffs, and that's not fair to the Canadiens netminder. And, after the Four Nations face-off, you have to admit that he did play very well, and I'll be the first one to say so, but as we advanced towards the playoffs, his game started to come down, and that's kind of what I worry about. It's the only thing I worry about when it comes to back-to-backs. Players, they tend to recover a little bit faster, whatever the case is. They only play 20 minutes a night or 25. But when you take a look at guys like Sam Montembeault and Jakub Dobeš, who are on the ice for all of 60 minutes, and they're sliding side to side, up, down on their knees, it takes a toll on a goaltender. And it's a lot harder to recover after back-to-back nights for a goalie. Yeah, they're young. Yeah, they'll be able to get over it, but it's still taxing. So what's the big deal? It's not. It's always been the same thing when you look at the Canadiens and when you look at teams in the Eastern Conference. Always. And there's not going to be very much change as far as that's concerned unless the league evens itself out. It's not going to. You play every team at least once in a season, right? They're planning on expanding from 82 to 84. Well, there you go, folks. It doesn't... At the end of the day, they're going to add a bunch of teams. There are a few teams that were told to pony up some expansion fees. And so we're going to go from 32 to what? 34, 36? It looks like it's going to be 36 because 4 teams were added to the list. They were told to pony up their expansion money. But at the end of the day, no matter what happens, there's always going to be that West Coast bias. Even for teams that are in the Midwest, like, let's say a Chicago or whatnot, it's still considered Eastern, right? And the travel's not that bad. Chicago, Minnesota, whatever the case is. And, they have back-to-backs upwards of a dozen at least. But why do the Canadiens always get 15, 16, 17? Who knows? At the end of the day, the Canadiens have to be prepared for it. They've got the schedule. They'll be able to plan for it. So the question is, what's the big deal? It's not, guys. The Canadiens start their season at home against the Seattle Kraken. I'm more interested about that little tidbit of marketing genius. Who gives a shit if the Kraken are in Montreal to start the season? We start in Toronto and Detroit on the 8th and 9th, but then we come home to play the Kraken. It couldn't be the Senators or the Bruins or, anybody else that people care about. It's the Seattle Kraken. It's going to be the night Joe Veleno, who we're going to talk about in a second, gets his revenge against the team that didn't want him and bought him out. Really? Who cares about the Seattle Kraken? When the Canadiens open their season, fans want to have something engaging, right? A game that you're going to care about early on, right? It could be the Bruins. And I know the Bruins aren't the team that they used to be, but we still hate the Bruins with good reason. Or why not just bring Toronto into Montreal for game 2 of 5 that they play during the season? What's the big freaking deal? Nope, we can't do that. Toronto's got to play everybody. It's got to be a Saturday night game, and we've got to have national coverage. Okay, so when you charge people and you gouge them an extra $75 for $50 Canadian for Sportsnet Plus, that's what you're looking at, right? Those games. So if the Canadiens start midweek, we're not going to have them play anybody of substance. We're going to have them play the Seattle Kraken. And, after that, they play Nashville on the 16th. They start at home on the 14th, which is a Tuesday, and that very well explains why they're not playing somebody like the Leafs or Detroit or Chicago or Buffalo or the Rangers or Boston. One of the original 6. Somebody would give a damn about. Nope, we're going to play the Kraken on a Tuesday night because the league doesn't care. Because the game's going to be covered by RDS and TSN and not Sportsnet regionally, and that's it. If it was a Wednesday game and the league was covering it, I bet you, and Sportsnet, was covering it, I bet you it would be a team of substance. But because it's a Tuesday night, nobody cares, and that's where we stand. Now, the big news of today is that the Montreal Canadiens signed Joe Veleno. And now Veleno is an interesting case. He's a good-looking kid, by the way, right? He's only 25 years old. He's been in the league for 5 years, and he's struggled throughout, right? And whether it's because he's played on teams that have had some depth or whether it's because he just can't find his footing. Here's a kid who tore it up in his last year of junior and hasn't been able to really translate that success over to the National Hockey League. When you take a look at his numbers, in 306 games, he's only got 81 points. He's a minus 65. So, what's there to say about Joe Veleno? His career face-off percentage is roughly around 43%. Again, nothing to write home about, but it's better than some other players on the Montreal Canadiens, including a Kirby Dach. So, where does he slot? You never know where he's going to fit in. He may very well be a third or fourth line guy. You bump up Jake Evans to play on the third line, and you have him play on the fourth line with Anderson and Gallagher, while Jake Evans plays in between Laine and I forget who I saw on the right wing anyway, and Demidov or whoever it is anyway. So you have him play on the third line, and Jake Evans is the defensive conscience on that line for two guys on his wing that don't really play a lot of defense. That's fine. I have no problem with that. And you have Veleno at the bottom pairing, playing with an Anderson and a Gallagher. There's no question his work ethic is good. He forechecks hard. He could throw the body, drop some mitts from time to time. Local kid who, one thing for sure, an Italian local kid who's playing for the Montreal Canadiens, his mom's going to say mazzat if you don't play well. But, the one thing about Joe Veleno that you can count on is he's a redemption project. And here's the thing, right? I heard this earlier with between McGuire and Murphy, and that is that, he's a bit of a brotherhood pickup. Phil LeCavalier is his agent. LeCavalier used to work for Kent Hughes. In fact, Phil LeCavalier actually used to be my neighbor. He lived down the street here in St. Lazare. But getting back to it, LeCavalier, again, worked with Hughes. He's Veleno's agent. His brother works for the Canadiens. It's a marriage, right? Only makes sense that they bring in a guy at $900,000 for one season to see whether or not he still has what it takes to play in the National Hockey League. And if you remember just a few years ago, the Canadiens did something similar with Sean Monahan, where they signed him for not too much money after he was bought out and gave him a chance. Now, granted, he got injured and that chance didn't come in the first season, but they gave him another contract for the next year. And then he didn't disappoint. He earned himself a contract with the Columbus Blue Jackets, and that's exactly what the Canadiens promised. Maybe that's what they're doing here with Veleno. Maybe Veleno is a little bit of an insurance policy in case some of the other deals that they're trying to get through to don't come down the pipe. And it's only good GMing, for lack of a better term, when GMs cover their ass. I mean, they need a left-handed center. You can't go into the season without one. There's no ifs, ands, or buts about that. And if you think you can, you're dreaming in color. You have to have options on both sides. Now, granted, they've got Alex Newhook, but that's only one. You need to have multiple options. And you're talking about in situations where you want a left-handed center on the ice, whether it's on an icing call or whatever. On an icing, the Canadiens have the choice of which side they're going to take the face-off on. And when they do that, it's either going to be Suzuki or whoever else you want. It could be Evans. It could be, any right-handed guy. It doesn't matter. They can pick their side. So that's not the point. The point is that you have to have somebody, with a left-handed face-off capability for other situations that are out of the Canadiens' control. And so Veleno is a decent option for a kid that is going to play in front of his hometown crowd and doesn't want the grief, and I mean the grief, of having to face his friends and them giving him shit because he doesn't play well, right? And that's going to happen. We've seen that happen with other local guys like Mark Barberio. I'm sure it happens with Mike Matheson to a certain extent. But at the end of the day, I mean, you are what you are, right? And Joe Veleno is definitely a redemption project. He's got the capability to put points on the board. He proved that in junior. But he needs to be given a chance, and the chance has to be earned. So we'll see. He's got a one-way contract, so, he's going to make $900,000 one way or the other, and it's going to count against the Canadiens. They could bury him in the American Hockey League if it doesn't work out. He's going to have to clear waivers, obviously. But for a guy that just got bought out, if he does end up in the AHL, I'm sure nobody's going to, say, oh, I want Veleno. So it's his last chance. And given that it's his last chance, I think this offseason is really important for him. He's going to have to really dig deep and remember what kind of player he was. Not the player that he's become in the last 5 seasons. Because being an NHL journeyman in the first 5 years of your career can really put the screws to your thought process. So let's leave it at that and see what the Canadiens actually do with him. Maybe he ends up being a piece in another deal. Who knows? But, if he does stay on the roster, which I presume he will, and he plays third or fourth line, or maybe even higher if he does well in the preseason. You never know, guys. Players earn their ice time under Marty St. Louis. So if he does play well, maybe he ends up higher in the lineup. I expect him to maybe be the 3-4 at center. He won't be the 2C that they're looking for, but he's a hell of a stopgap. And if it works out well for the Canadiens, could be another first-round pick that they added to the roster that, nobody really gave a chance to. And that's always encouraging. Now, moving on. Everybody's still bitching and complaining about Patrik Laine. Oh, Patrik Laine this and Patrik Laine that. He's lazy. He doesn't play defense. We talk about this almost on a weekly basis. But here's the thing about Patrik Laine. I found out some stuff about him, and I think it's fair to say that I should share it with people. Number one, he's still having health issues. The knee injury is nagging, right? And not because of what happened early on in the season when he got hit by Paré, but later on, right as the playoffs started, I forget who it was that hit him, but he did the same thing again. He made that same type of movement and got clipped by somebody, and you could tell it bugged him, but not enough to get him out of the lineup. And then after he broke his finger and he couldn't shoot the puck or stick handle anymore, I mean, that was that. But, the hand is healed, but the knee may very well be a problem. The Canadiens now are, discussing whether or not they're going to extend him. And I think a lot of that is going to have to do with the way he starts off the season, whether or not he actually gets with the program. It's fine. You're talking about a guy who wasn't expected to play defense on any of the teams that he played with. And that in and of itself was a lot of the reason why he got, screwed out of jobs in Winnipeg and Columbus. And he was scrutinized nonstop because of the fact that he was playing D. But you don't know what the coaches tell players, right? You don't know whether or not a player is told, you know what, don't worry about it. Let your center and winger on the opposite side worry about playing D. I want you to focus on playing offense. So do whatever you have to do. So Laine goes and drives into the zone, gets a good scoring chance, and he, kind of lollygags it back into the zone. And that's what all people see, especially when a team gets scored against. but they don't see the positives. Patrik Laine had 20 goals last year in 52 games. That's nothing to scoff at for a guy who had missed a year and a half. You know, it's important for everyone to understand that this isn't a guy who's been playing consistently for the last 7 years. It's a guy who, took time off for mental health issues. And there's going to be lags in his game. There's going to be days where people in the Montreal media are going to talk to him, or he's going to read something somewhere online or in the paper, and it's going to bother him because he's that type of guy. It's up to the Canadiens to keep him away from all that scrutiny and tell him, you know what, Patrik, don't read that shit during the season. Play your game. Don't worry about them. And that's the way it should be. For all intents and purposes, we love to criticize players when they screw the pooch, but when they play positively, we kind of push it off to the side. And there was a lot of positive from Patrik Laine last year. But at the end of the day, people look at only the bad stuff. The fact that he couldn't finish off the playoffs. We needed him. He wasn't there. The fact that, he only had 20 goals on the season and couldn't score at 5-on-5. Is it all his fault? Not really. But some of it is. But keep in mind, guys, and I brought this up with Kirby Dach, who again is going to be in the same situation as he was last season. When players come back from major knee injuries, right, as is the case with Dach, and I fear that the knee injury with Laine is a little bit more severe than the Canadiens are letting on. And there's no proof to that, but it's kind of the feeling I'm getting, right, because of all the hearsay I'm hearing about, the fact that he's got medical issues. The only thing that I can think of is that particular injury. But, back in the day, Andrei Markov injured his knee and was gone for a significant amount of time. And when he came back, he wasn't really the same player. Couldn't pivot the same way, couldn't turn in a certain direction, certainly couldn't cross over. And then what happened? His knee started to get better as he played and continued to rehab, going through drills on the ice. And then all of a sudden, people forgot about the fact that Markov had hurt his knee because he was playing back to his potential. And that's kind of the thing that we have to give both Dach and Laine. Give them time to heal, guys. Yes, we want him back in the lineup, but you don't want him back in the lineup at the expense of their ability to play. So we'll see. I know the Canadiens want to keep him. I know it's not going to be at whatever the cap it is. I think it's at $8.7 million. It's not going to be at that number. And I think Laine is okay with that. Right? I think Laine is okay with taking a pay cut and coming down to about the $5 million mark, according to what I'm hearing. It remains to be seen, but if they can get him at a hometown discount at $5 million, why not keep those goals on the power play? Even if he's going to be on the second wave, right? Because of Demidov and the way he showed on the power play late in the season and in the playoffs. Even if he's going to be on that second wave, he can be the catalyst on that second wave. And he can still score 20, 25, 30 goals next year. Especially if his 5-on-5 play is better. But again, it's all contingent on his health. But we'll see how that goes. Now, back to my favorite defenseman. No, I'm not talking about David Savard. I'm talking about Mike Matheson. I'm really critical on Matheson, and it's not because he's a lousy defenseman, okay? Don't hear me out. Mike Matheson, for all the time he spent on the ice, and he had an average of 25.05 last year per game on ice, he came back at a -6, playing against some of the best offensive lines in the league. So there's nothing to scoff at. But the biggest issue that everybody has, including myself and Mike Matheson, is that when push comes to shove and it's crunch time, that's when he makes mistakes more often than not. And it's not in the defensive zone. It's normally in the neutral zone or at the offensive blue line. He'll make a mistake that cost the Canadiens a goal. Now, we saw that with Laine Hudson, especially in the playoffs against Ovechkin. But, Matheson, when the Canadiens were trying to push to get an equalizer or get within a goal, that's when he would make those mistakes. And that's when people would be like yelling at the screen, like I was, and how bad he was at giving away the puck and it costing the Canadiens goals. Suffice it to say that I know Mike Matheson doesn't think he had a great season last year, and God knows how the Canadiens are going to use him. But this year, there's a little bit of a logjam on the left-hand side, and I really wonder how the Canadiens are going to mitigate the ice time, right? You've got Laine Hudson, who's obviously their best offensive defenseman and is going to get the majority of the power play time. You've got Caden Gooley, who last year, despite being injured for a good portion of the year, up until that point where he was injured, he was the Canadiens' most consistent two-way defenseman. So he needs time on ice, at least 18 to 20 minutes. Then there's Arbor Xhekaj. If Matheson is in the lineup, and so is Gooley, and so is Hudson, where does Xhekaj slide in? He slots in as a seventh defenseman. Is that going to help him in a contract year? I really don't think so. I think he actually needs to really bear down and, show very well to earn his next contract. He earned the last one, no doubt about that. But last year was a down year for Jack-Eye, making way too many mistakes chasing the puck. But, at the end of the year, he did seem to stay home a little bit more, and he was better in the defensive zone as the season progressed. But early on, when he got benched, it wasn't because he wasn't scoring offensively, despite the fact his offensive numbers were down from the previous season. And it wasn't because he wasn't willing to drop the mitts when he needed to. But the reason in and of itself was because in man-to-man coverage, he over-pursued players with the puck and didn't do his job as good as he could. And that's why he ended up in Marty St. Louis' doghouse. He's got time to work on it. God knows that the players work on their stuff. They're going to come into training camp, get into shape, and they're going to work on, they're going to go through video sessions, and they're going to work on their different deficiencies. And that's what's going to happen with Jack-Eye. But for Matheson, I don't know if he makes it through the season. I'm pretty sure he's going to get dealt at the deadline, right? But overall, he's the only veteran D we've got, right? You can, other than maybe Kyrou, but I don't think he's really at that level yet. And, Dobson's only got a couple of years under his belt. It's going to be interesting to see what happens because there's going to be a lot of young D. And, whether or not Matheson is, going to be that elder statesman on the back end or whether he's going to be dangled for a deal, it's going to be interesting. But, the summer's not done yet. We've got all the way until September, 1st for the Canadiens to, drop below the cap. So we'll see what happens. There's a whole month and a half before that happens. Now, we'll take a look around the rumor mill and the Canadiens as a whole this week. And starting off with, can we put the Sidney Crosby rumor to rest, please? Can we just stop? Now I'm hearing that, possibly the LA Kings might get involved in the Crosby sweepstakes because, his agent is friends with the LA Kings and with Luc Robitaille, that being Pat Brisson. Who gives a rat's ass? He's not going to LA. The LA rumor was something that started very early on because he was good friends with Jack Johnson. But that's not going to happen now. In the later stages of his career, he's either going to be looking to go to a contender or he's going to be looking to stay at home and retire with the team he's with. He's not coming to Montreal, guys. The only reason that Sidney Crosby signed an extension with Pittsburgh and didn't retire earlier, well, I wouldn't say the only reason. Obviously, he had to remain productive, which he did. But the other reason is because he wanted another shot at the Olympics. I said so a couple of shows ago. And so the Olympics are coming up this year. After that, he may very well say, you know what, guys? Once the season's over, I'm lacing him. I'm hanging him up. We don't know. So why, if you're the Montreal Canadiens, would you sacrifice prospects that are contributing to your team in order to pick up a guy who's going to retire in 2 seasons? If you had another 5 years, yeah, go make the deal. I don't care. But, Eric Engels said that the Canadiens might, dangle Cole Caulfield in a deal. No, you're not going to do that. Cole Caulfield is in his 4th season. Sidney Crosby's going to be in his 20th. No, you're not going to do that. Forget about it. I mean, the Canadiens have worked so hard to rebuild this hockey club. You're not going to sacrifice your future for the here and now when, a lot of people are saying this rebuild is done. It's not done, guys. The weed they're smoking, throw it out. It's not done. There's still more to do. That 2C, they have to find it, right? But they're not going to do it if they've got a guy like Sidney Crosby at 2C or 1C for that matter. It'll probably be 2C. But you're not going to do that with him there. There's no need for it. Yes, it gives you time to develop a guy internally. But given the fact that people say that Zach Bolduc can play center, and now that they've signed Joe Veleno, stop with the Crosby stuff. Unless the Penguins are willing to give him away, he's not coming here. And for everything that I've heard, his preference would be to go to Colorado to go play with Nathan McKinnon and take a shot at another Stanley Cup. Now, the other thing we have to stop talking about for a little bit anyway is the Jordan Kyrou deal. I don't know Okay, I understand that up until July 1st, everybody was like hot and bothered about the fact the Canadians were chasing after Jordan Kyrou. But now that his no movement clause is kicked in, maybe he is, maybe he isn't willing to come to the Canadians and waive that no movement clause. But is it worth the Canadians giving up futures again for Jordan Kyrou? Yes, Jordan Kyrou is young. Yes, he is developing into a very good NHL player. But take a look down the right side. Until Brendan Gallagher or, retires, what are you going to do? You're going to take Slafkovsky off the first line and put Kyrou there? Or you're going to take Patrik Laine off the third or second line to put Kyrou there? There's depth on this team now that we didn't have before. And yes, the one spot where we have a weakness is 2C. But you're not going to sacrifice everything to go get Jordan Kyrou. You never know who might develop into that Kyrou style of player. Kirby Dach coming back and playing on the right wing may very well be the answer on the right wing. He's got offensive talent. He has to stay healthy, but he has offensive talent. If he can't stay healthy, well, then that's another story altogether. And my understanding is that the Canadians are trying to move him, but they can't given the fact that there's no proof he's healthy yet. But at the end of the day, Kyrou in Montreal, I don't foresee that happening. And one interesting tidbit that did come out of the CBA is the new exception for a 19-year-old player in the American Hockey League. Now, for years, you know how it's been. Players get drafted. They come to development camp. They come to rookie camp. They do well. And they've got 9 games before they have to go back to junior, right? That may very well change. And from what I understand, they're targeting Hayden Papanikis next year for that coveted exceptional spot in the American Hockey League. They were really impressed with Papanikis at the Habs development camp earlier this summer. So if he continues to play the way he was playing there, and they'll monitor him closely in his next year of junior, when he turns 19, they may very well say, you know what, Hayden, instead of, see if you can't make the team as a rookie, but if you don't, we're sending you to the American Hockey League. And that, turn his development curve upward a little bit. And that AHL option, it kind of helps with development of junior players, because right now everybody's all positive about the fact that junior players have the ability to commit to NCAA teams. Here's how I look at it, right? It works out well for the player because, he can go through his 4 years of junior and then go to college, which is great. If he chooses to go to the NHL, he can, but junior teams are going to lose out on some of those players. I mean, not everybody who goes to the NCAA wants to stay all 4 years at junior, right? A kid that, gets committed to, let's say, a Penn State and wants to go there to continue his hockey development, he might very well decide to leave his junior team at 18 years old and go to the NCAA, at which point he may not be available to the National Hockey League for another 4 years. But it's great for the player. Development is, from what my understanding and the things I've heard from people that I know in a lot of the junior leagues down south, the preferred way to develop to get to the National Hockey League is actually to go through the NCAA now. So it bodes well for them. Doesn't bode well for the junior A leagues. They're going to be stuck sending their kids to U Sports and sending them to Division III. Division III is not really the way to go when it comes to, getting to the National Hockey League, although it has been done before. And you look at leagues like the QMJHL, and I think the president of the IIHF, Luc Tardif, brought it up, that with kids going to the NCAA to develop, what happens to these leagues that lose their star players? How good is the hockey going to be at that point? And, how often are players going to get drafted out of the CHL? We see how many players are getting drafted out of the U.S. Development League and the NCAA. It's an interesting dilemma. But this little tidbit of, being able to pull a player out at 19 and kind of saving him from that NCAA scrutiny, it's a nice little tool to have in the pocket of NHL teams. And I think that's the reason why they put it there. The other thing I wanted to bring up there's a couple of things. Number one, everybody's freaking out about the fact that Carey Price's contract is going to get traded. Guys, that doesn't mean he's not retiring a Hab. He's already retired. He's just, on long-term injured reserve, right? Because the Canadians don't want to have to pay all that extra money for him retiring. So they're trading his contract. They're probably going to end up trading it after September 1st when his bonuses get paid. And all of that plus maybe about 1.2 million is going to get covered by his insurance. So whatever team grabs him, okay, is going to be on the hook for 800 grand for carry price. And like I mentioned last show, it's going to be a $10.5 million cap hit. Teams like the Ducks, they can use that cap space to hit the floor because they need it. And if they need it to hit the floor, then the Canadiens are doing them a favor. If the Canadiens are doing them a favor, I wonder whether or not the Canadiens would take a shot at an offer sheet for Mason Mactavish. Yes, he was qualified, but the fact that he was qualified doesn't exclude him from getting an offer sheet from another team. Now, the Canadiens might not be doing that just because they want to be able to offload Price's contract to the Ducks. But at the end of the day, maybe, just maybe, being able to grab Mactavish on an offer sheet might be worth it. Because here's the thing. If you sign a player, I think the threshold is just over $4.6 million. If you sign him below that, between 3.5 and 4.6, I think the penalty is a second-round draft pick. The Canadiens have 2 next year. So isn't it worth it to sign up to an offer sheet to see if the Ducks, they match? And even if they match, throw in Price's contract after. They'll be able to take $5.5 million off the cap. So you trade Carey Price for Mason Mactavish. You think that would work? Or am I just freaking crazy? I don't know. I don't think I'm crazy. The one thing that I do know is there's no Kadri coming to Montreal. The Canadiens just don't want him. Okay? All these rumors, we don't have any validity to them. Teams are spitballing. A lot of this crap is coming from agents, right? And we know how agents are. They try to spin things in their teams or their clients, I should say, favor. So they're rumors. Until such time as somebody of substance comes out and says, you know what? I've heard from an NHL source that, not I've heard from a source. We're not going to put any validity to it. So leave it alone. But I want to see in the comments below, what do you think the Canadiens should do next? How do you think Veleno is going to fit in? And do you really think the back-to-backs are going to be a problem for the Canadiens this season? I don't think they are. I think Veleno will fit in just fine as a young former first-round pick and as a redemption story. And I think the Canadiens are almost guaranteed to make the playoffs this year. They won't be a wildcard team. I said it first, okay? See you guys next week.